Hello everybody, welcome to the healing tutorials. In this tutorial we're going to look at some of the healing options that we have that we can use to fix photographs, or we can manipulate photographs to enhance their value or their actual physical appearance. So what we're looking for in this tutorial is the use of the healing tools. So over on your toolbar, you should have a Band-Aid, and we're going to use kind of the first two Band-Aids here. We have the spot healing brush tool, the healing brush tool, and then the other thing that we are going to use is we're going to use for this tutorial, we're going to use the clone stamp tool. So the clone stamp tool just looks like a stamp. It's underneath the Band-Aid. So those are three major tools, and then we're also going to come down here and we are going to use the blur tool. So the blur tool looks like a little raindrop. So we're going to use the blur tool, we're going to use the clone stamp, and then we're going to use the healing tools. So these are the four photographs that we are going to be working on. But before I start working with these photographs, I'm going to actually come in and this photograph and just show you the difference between the tools, because they all act pretty similar, but there is a little bit of difference between each tool. So the first thing I'm going to look at is the spot healing brush tool. And what the spot healing brush tool is it is going to allow you to paint, and with your selection, it's going to merge the two sides together. So for example, if I want to remove this power line here, if I'm on my brush tool, and I can actually make this bigger or smaller depending on the size. If I make it bigger, and you can see here up in my options, I'm going to enlarge this and I'll just show you what happens. If I make it bigger and I make the selection, so it's going to take pixels and it's going to merge it toward the center. So it's going to take the bottom left hand side and the upper right hand side and kind of merge them together going inward. And when I do that, notice that because of where my selection tool was and how big my brush was, it has a hard time actually copying some of the pixels and making it blend together nicely. So I'm going to do Control Alt Z is my undo button. And I'm actually going to lower this back down. And because the power line is very small, I can make my paintbrush very small. And it's going to give me a little bit more detail. It's going to actually give me a lot better detail. So now I can go in and I can either just click, or I can use my mouse and paint over this. And essentially you're just painting it. And notice that it will start blending these together. So it will actually blend pixels together on either side to make it look like this power line was never here. So that's the spot healing brush tool. Again, we don't have to select an area that we want to copy. Photoshop will automatically figure out, and it takes and essentially erases this and then blends both sides of these together. And I can do this over and over again to kind of blend it in more and more as I like. So the next one I want to look at is the healing brush tool. Now the healing brush tool, it's going to make a selection of an object. So for example, I'm going to come up here and I'm going to select, if I hold my Alt button, I want to select a little bit darker rain cloud up here. I want this rain to be over on this portion here. So I'm going to click to make a selection. So I'm going to hold my Alt button down and I get this little kind of target area on my cursor. So I'm just going to click in this rain area. And now with my cursor, I'm going to start up here and I'm going to start painting. And I'm going to click and hold my mouse button. And if you notice, there is a plus sign on the left-hand side. That's showing me where I am copying pixels from. Now, when I copy these pixels, and what the healing brush tool does is it will actually merge or blend the current pixels that are there to the pixels that I am selecting. It's not essentially just going to copy exactly the same image or exactly the same. That's going to be the clone stamp tool. That's the difference between these two tools. This spot here, or the healing brush tool, allows me to select an area, paint it, but it's going to blend the actual pixels or blend the current image there, rather than the clone stamp tool, which we'll see in a minute, is when I make a selection, it's going to copy exactly what I am painting. So I'm just going to paint over this real quick. And I went a little too far, because you can see if I use my cursor and I go up to the power line, it's going to copy that power line. So I'm actually going to do Control Z to undo it. I'm going to make my selection again, this little rain cloud here. And then I'm going to start painting over it. And like I said, it is going to try to blend together. Image. And wherever that plus sign is where I am copying from. So there it goes. So now it looks like I have a little bit more of a rain cloud here than what I currently did. And remember, I just had this little portion here. And I could keep going across if I want to make another selection here. And I want this rain going all the way across. Make a selection. And I can keep going across. And it's going to blend the images together. And as more and more as I go over it, you can see that it becomes a little bit more defined. So now the next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to show you the clone stamp tool. The clone stamp tool exactly copies the pixels. It doesn't try to blend it together. Wherever you select and start painting, that's what's actually going to show up. So I'm going to hit my Alt, or I'm going to hold my Alt tab. And for example, I'm just going to pick this this little bush right here, and I'm going to set my cursor in the center. And say I want my cursor up, or I want another bush up here. So when I go and start selecting, again, you can see my plus sign. It's a little bit hidden down in the bush itself, but it's not trying to blend any of the images together. It's just taking it exactly the same as where I am painting from. And like I said, it's not going to try to blend anything together. So now you can see my cursor, and I'm right about to go and do the power line. And again, it's just copying exactly the same. Now, what I'd use the clone stamp for is maybe I need to add a boat. Maybe I need to add an additional boat into an ocean scene. There's already a boat there, but I need to copy and make a new one. I can go ahead and do that with the clone stamp tool. So those are the healing brush tools that we're going to work with, and I just wanted to explain a little bit the difference of each one, because they are very similar. So working with the tutorial now, the file that you have, the first one up here, we're going to use a clone stamp tool, and we are actually going to make another eyeball right in the center of this cat's forehead. So we're going to have 3 eyes. So that's what we're going to use a clone stamp tool for. This one over here, a really nice way to make something stand out is to blur the background, the actual background image. So what we're going to do with this, anywhere behind the actual car itself, we're going to blur. And that will make this car stand out, meaning that it's a little bit more, it's going to be shown in focus compared to the rest of the stuff. And it's going to draw my eyes to that car. So that's another form of emphasis that we can control. On the bulls here, we're going to use the spot healing tool on the bulls here to get rid of the actual text on here. And we want this, instead of being able to select an area, we just want it to merge because it is very small. We want it to merge together. And we can actually do that on this guy's face with the wrinkles. Again, the two work very similar, and we'll see when we get into the bulls how they actually work. So I'm going to zoom in. Your zoom in is on the bottom left hand side, and right now mine's at 33%. So I'm going to zoom into 100%, and I'm just going to use my cursor and my bars down below to zoom into this cat. So we're going to use the clone stamp tool here. And remember, to use a clone stamp tool, the very first thing we have to do is we have to select a selection area. And notice with my cursor right now, if I start painting on this, notice this is my selection from the other project that I was showing you. It does transfer over. So if I make a selection on this image and I go back to a clone stamp tool and I go back to another file, I can actually start painting that file. It's pretty cool. But for this, I'm going to do Control Z to undo it. and I'm going to hold my Alt button down. Remember, you have to make a selection for this. So my Alt button, you can choose either eye. I'm going to use this eye down here on the left-hand side, and I'm going to click just right in the center of it. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to come up here and notice that my paintbrush has a black dot in the center that's representing the center of the eye that we had. And I'm just going to slowly start working my way around. I'm not going to try and get all the skin around it, the fur around it. So I'm going to do as best I can to keep the outside away. And again, it's just copying it exactly the same. So there we go. With the cone stamp tool, I went around. Now I have a three-eyed cat. So next thing over here, we're going to go over to the car. I'm going to slide over to the car here. So the car, we're going to use the blur tool. So the blur tool looks like the little raindrop. And for this, I'm going to actually increase my size a little bit more because I have a very large area that I have up here. And I'm not worried exactly going around the car perfectly. So I'm going to maybe 110, 105. Doesn't have to be exact. My hardness, I'm going to keep at 100. And up here with the strength, I'm also going to keep at 100. The strength is how blurry it's going to get on one click or one drag over it. So notice, if I go to this tree right now and I click, essentially I'm just going to start painting over it. So I'm going to click and I'm going to start painting over it, and you can see how it is starting to blur out. So we want it to look like the car is in focus, that the photographer was making the car as the actual center point of focus. And we want everything else to be blurred. So we can go around the back side here. And actual photographers can actually do this with their cameras. The more talented photographers, they can put things in focus. And I'm actually just going to do the bottom just to show you guys. So I'm going to blur everything. And there we go. So rest image is blurred, and you can see now, because I didn't blur the car, you can see how much of an effect it has, that everything is blurry except for the car. It makes the car really stand out. So that's a blur option, and a lot of times we see this in like portraits or close-up of pictures of maybe something like a flower, that we want to focus on just one flower, and we can blur the rest of the background around it. So that's a blur option that we have here. So the next thing I'm going to do, I'm going to scroll down a little bit. And for this one, I'm going to come up here and I'm just going to use the spot healing brush. Because these are so small of wrinkles, we're going to actually remove the wrinkles around his forehead to make him look a little bit younger. But because the wrinkles are very, very small, we want to use the actual spot healing brush, because it'll be a little bit easier when we paint over it for the actual pixels to merge together. It's not a great distance that Photoshop has to figure out, okay, what pixels are going to match to make this look correct. So I'm going to use my spot healing brush tool. I'm going to click on it. And my paintbrush, I'm going to leave small, just because, again, the wrinkles on his forehead are smaller. So now I can just go and paint over it. And if you don't like it, you can go back and do it again. And notice we're just taking out some of the bigger wrinkles to make them look a little bit younger, because his Facebook profile doesn't want wrinkles in it. And this works great if we go if we're working on something, maybe a photo shoot for prom pictures or senior pictures, and someone has like a pimple that they don't want there. This is a great way to actually get rid of those pimples, that we don't see those marks. So I'm just going to keep going over this. Just little marks. And like I said, you can click as many times as you want. and get rid of the wrinkles under his eyes. And we'll do this side here. We'll get rid of some of his wrinkles on this side. Now you got to remember, it also depends on which way we move the cursor to. So there we go. So now that guy looks way different now without the wrinkles on his forehead. He looks a little bit younger. So again, that's a great way when we're doing very, very small detail work on merging the pixels together. That's a great way, that spot healing tool. Now, the last tool that we're going to use is the healing brush tool. Remember, the healing brush tool, we need to make a selection for that. So for this one, I'm going to pick just underneath of this. And I'm going to pick underneath to the right-hand side. So I'm going to hit my Alt button. Or underneath to the left-hand side. And now I can go ahead, and you can see my selection tool underneath. I can go ahead and start painting it over. And there's one. So I'm going to come down here. I'm going to hit my Alt selection tool. And again, you can paint, but you notice if I keep going up without restarting it, I get some of the, when I go too far ahead, I get some of the details. So you'll see here, I'll do that on this one. If I click my selection tool and I start painting, because it doesn't totally heal up, notice I just replaced that. So for something like this, I actually have to click and do little strokes with the paintbrush to make sure that I am healing it correctly. So my selection tool, just going to do small paintbrush strokes on it. And again, I went too far with that. And there we go. So now all the lettering's gone out of it. It looks pretty good. Again, the guy's face with the spot healing brush, the blur tool, and then the clone stamp tool to make that eye. So in your final project, you're going to have pictures, and it's going to label, and it's going to tell you what to do. So you use those selection tools to complete the task on your next lesson.